Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight we're heading to 1919 Boston, a city that smelled like fermenting sugar, sounded like horse hooves on cobblestone, and ran on a mix of industrial ambition and zero building codes. This is the story of the Great Molasses Flood, a very real moment in American history when a 50-foot tall tank of sticky brown syrup exploded, sending a 2 million-gallon tidal wave of molasses crashing through the streets. Buildings were flattened, horses were swallowed whole, people drowned in pancake topping. It's dark, it's absurd, and yes, it's all true. Before the syrup reaches chest height, and your shoes get permanently fused to the sidewalk, go ahead and like the video and subscribe, but only if slow-moving disasters and bureaucratic failure help you drift off to sleep. Drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always a treat to see who's staying up late for historical catastrophes. Now take a breath. Let the sugar fog roll in and prepare to wade, gasp and gurgle your way through one of the strangest disasters in American history, one slow, syrupy step at a time. You moved to Boston's North End in the winter of 1918, which sounds romantic until you actually get there. The streets are narrow, the buildings lean like they've been drunk since the 1700s, and the air smells like someone spilled molasses in a bar and just left it there, which, to be fair, isn't far from the truth. You find a tiny apartment wedged between a bakery and a tenement filled with children who've never heard of an indoor voice. The floor creaks, the windows rattle, the rent is low. You tell yourself it's historic. That's what broke people say when they can see daylight through their roof. The locals are a mix of immigrants, labourers, and people who smoke so much their voices sound like gravel soaked in whiskey. Most of them work nearby, on the docks, in the factories, or, if they're lucky, in one of the warehouses that doesn't regularly catch fire. You get a job hauling crates for Purity Distilling, which sounds clean, but definitely isn't. The company's headquarters is a sprawling collection of brick buildings, rusting pipes, and one massive steel tank that looms over the waterfront like an oil drum on steroids. You ask someone what's in it. They say molasses, then spit on the ground, like the word personally offended them. At first, the tank doesn't really bother you. It's just there. Giant, dark, sweating molasses, like it's alive. You pass it every day on your way to work, half expecting it to blink. Nobody trusts it, but nobody does anything about it either. That's how things work here. You shrug. You've got bigger problems than a leaky sugar silo, like rent, like the fact that your boots are held together by a string and wishful thinking, like the rats that have unionized under your sink. Winter in Boston is no joke. It's bitter, mean, and not afraid to slap you across the face just for stepping outside. But there's a kind of charm to it too. The harbour glitters with ice. The factory smoke hangs low like a blanket nobody washed. And every once in a while, you catch a breeze that smells like molasses cookies. Right before you remember, it's just industrial runoff drifting in from the distillery. It's fine. It's all fine. The tank groans sometimes, but you pretend not to hear it. You've heard worse sounds from your upstairs neighbour's bathroom. You learn quickly that the tank has a reputation. Kids dare each other to put their ears against it. Old men curse it under their breath. A horse once reared and bolted just from walking past. It leaks so badly that the company paints it brown to hide the drips. You once saw a dog try to lick it. The dog did not return. Still, nobody stops using it. It's full of molasses meant to be distilled into alcohol, most of which is headed for munitions or bootleggers. The company is making a killing, and you're making $1.20 a day. So you go about your business. You ignore the warning signs because everyone else is doing the same. It's easy to pretend danger isn't real when it's slow-moving and made of sugar. That's the thing about molasses. It's not scary, not until it's too late, not until you hear the pop of a rivet, not until the air shifts in that awful sticky way. Not until you smell something warm and wrong and impossibly sweet and realise, just a few seconds too late, that the tank has stopped groaning. It's screaming. The tank was doomed from the start. That much becomes clear the first time you get close enough to hear it breathe. It's not supposed to breathe, of course. It's a tank, not a living thing. But the way it expands and contracts, the way the metal creaks and shifts as if trying to relieve itself of some terrible internal pressure, you start to wonder. It's 50 feet tall and 90 feet across. A hulking iron drum bolted together with more hope than engineering. The official line is that it holds molasses. The unofficial line is that it holds secrets, and none of them are good. It belongs to the Purity Distilling Company, which is a subsidiary of the United States Industrial Alcohol Company, a name that already sounds like it's hiding a crime. This is not a place where engineers wear hard hats and clipboards. This is a place where men in suits order tanks to be built quickly, cheaply, and with as little interference as possible. Back in 1915, they decided they needed a massive container to store molasses near Boston Harbor because molasses was money and war was coming. Alcohol made from molasses could be used in munitions, and when there's profit in explosives, who cares if the welds hold? The man who approved the tank's design had no background in structural engineering. He was, quite literally, a financier, someone who could read a balance sheet but not a blueprint. He looked at the plans, saw steel and bolts and circles, and gave a hearty, confident, "Looks good to me." No stress tests were run. No structural inspections were performed. No one checked to see if the thing could actually hold 2.3 million gallons of anything, let alone an oozing, semi-fermented sludge that weighed more than 10,000 tons. The only person who objected was an actual engineer, and he was politely ignored until he stopped trying. When construction began, the tank went up fast. Too fast. Some of the steel used was thinner than industry standards. The rivets were driven in without proper alignment. The seams were sloppy. There were rumours the workers weren't even given the full plans, just told to build the circle thing over there. By the time they finished, the whole thing looked like a rusted soda can that someone had stepped on and then tried to fix with tape, but it stood. That was the important part. It stood, and when they poured the first wave of molasses into it, nobody died immediately. So it was fine, except it wasn't. Within days, the tank began to leak. Molasses dripped down the sides in thick brown trails, pooling at the base like something out of a low-budget horror film. Children would run up with sticks to collect the sweet goo, treating the structure like a public candy fountain. Adults were less amused. Locals began to complain. Workers reported strange noises, groans, creaks, an occasional sharp pop like a distant gunshot. One of your co-workers claims he saw the tank bulge once when the sun hit it just right. You say that's impossible. He says, "You weren't there." To address the complaints, the company did what any responsible industrial operation would do. They painted the tank brown. Not to repair it, just to hide the leaks. The molasses kept coming. The tank kept moaning. But at least now, from a distance, it looked solid. Appearances mattered more than integrity. You heard that the company performed a test at one point, filled the tank 2/3 full, and waited to see if it burst. It didn't. Test passed, stamp it, ship it, fill it to the top next time. All good. Nobody in management lived in the North End. They didn't walk past the tank each morning. They didn't hear it at night. They didn't live under its shadow, wondering if today would be the day the bolts finally lost their grip. For them, the tank was a line item, a storage solution, a place to put the raw material before it became something useful, like industrial alcohol or bootleg rum. When you ask about safety, your supervisor just shrugs. "It's held so far," he says. "That's all you can ask." You think about that line every time the air smells like yeast and rust. The molasses isn't just sweet, it's fermenting, bubbling, expanding. It doesn't sit still. It builds pressure, and on warm days, You swear you can feel the tank vibrating, like it's itching to come undone. Once, on a lunch break, you sit on a nearby crate and watch a rivulet of syrup trace its way down the metal skin. Slow and stubborn, it's almost hypnotic, almost peaceful. You wonder if this is what it looks like when a monster bleeds. Some nights, you lie in bed and hear the groaning from 2 blocks away. You tell yourself it's the wind, maybe a ship pulling into the harbour, but deep down, a voice you try to ignore whispers something else. That tank is trying to warn you. You mention it once at the bar, between sips of watery beer and bites of salt cod. An older man next to you leans in and says, "That thing's gonna blow." Then he laughs, says he's joking, and buys you another round. But he doesn't stop glancing at the door after that. You start to pay more attention. You notice that the tank makes more noise when it's warmer. You notice that the company seems to keep it filled to the brim, even when deliveries are delayed. You hear from a friend that one of the foremen filed a complaint and was quietly reassigned to a different facility. You begin to wonder how many people know the truth, that the tank is a disaster waiting to happen, and how many are just hoping they're somewhere else when it does. And yet, life goes on. The tank doesn't collapse, the rivets don't pop. The molasses doesn't burst forth and sweep through the streets like a nightmare, at least not yet. And with every day that passes without disaster, the fear dulls, people get used to it. They walk past the leaks, they ignore the sounds, they pretend the smell isn't stronger than usual. That's the funny thing about danger. If it shows up slowly enough, you'll call it background noise. So you keep working. You keep walking past it, you whistle as you go, you try not to think about the fact that you live 3 blocks from the largest unregulated sugar bomb in the city. You try not to imagine what it would look like if 2.3 million gallons of molasses were suddenly let loose. How it would move, what it would crush, who it would drown. You laugh at yourself? That's ridiculous. Molasses doesn't explode. Not until it does. It's easy to laugh at molasses. Sweet, sluggish, brown goo. The kind of thing you pour over pancakes or forget about in the back of your pantry until it hardens into a sugary fossil. But in the early 20th century, molasses wasn't just dessert. It was industry. It was fuel. It was a sticky little cog in the war machine. And storing it by the millions of gallons wasn't eccentric. It was profitable. The key is alcohol. Not the fun kind you drink at speakeasies and then regret in the morning, though that was certainly part of it, but industrial alcohol, the kind used to make everything from smokeless gunpowder to cleaning solvents to explosives. When World War I broke out, the demand skyrocketed. Industrial alcohol became a strategic resource, and molasses was one of the cheapest, most abundant ways to make it. You didn't need grapes or grain or potatoes, just this black gold shipped in from the Caribbean by the barrel. If you were in the alcohol business, you didn't store molasses because you liked the taste. You stored it because it could be turned into profit with very little effort and even less regulation. Purity Distilling was part of a larger conglomerate, the United States Industrial Alcohol Company. Their goal wasn't to make candy, it was to supply the US government and any other willing buyers with the raw materials they needed to fight wars and make things explode. The molasses stored in Boston's North End was not earmarked for cookies or gingerbread houses. It was destined to become bombs and cleaning agents. That tank, the one sweating in the winter sun, groaning under its own weight, was essentially a reservoir for future fire. Of course, there was another reason they rushed to fill it: prohibition. The writing was already on the wall by 1918. The temperance movement was in full swing, dry laws were sweeping the country, and the 18th Amendment was looming like a very sober thundercloud. The owners of the tank knew the clock was ticking. Once alcohol became illegal, the game would change. So they filled the tank as full as possible, not because they needed that much molasses right then, but because they were racing to distill it into something valuable before the government made it a crime. And so, what sat in that tank wasn't just molasses, it was money. It was urgency. It was the byproduct of war, greed, and the American instinct to squeeze profit from anything sticky enough to sell. The fact that it smelled like baked goods was just a distraction. The real story was ethanol, explosives, and panic. And if it all came bubbling up and tore the city apart, well, accidents happen. It's January 15th, 1919, just after noon. You're on break, sitting outside with a hunk of bread, a half-frozen apple, and fingers you can barely feel. The air has that sharp winter sting that makes your lungs feel smaller. You chew slowly, staring at nothing, letting the cold settle into your coat like an uninvited guest. It's not a bad day by Boston standards. The sun is out, the harbour's not frozen solid, and nobody's thrown a shoe at you yet. You take it as a win. Across the street, the Molasses tank looms like always. Giant, silent, except today it's not completely silent. You hear a pop, small, sharp, metallic. Then another, like nails being pulled out of a coffin lid. You glance up. The tank is shivering. That's not normal. It's never shivered before. You squint, and for one horrible second, you see the whole thing swell outward. Not a lot, just a little. Like it's exhaling for the first time in years. And then it bursts. There's no warning, no graceful collapse, just sound. A horrible, ripping explosion that tears the air apart. It's not like thunder. Thunder is distant. This is here. The tank splits wide open with a bang so loud it registers as silence. A full second where your brain refuses to process it, because nothing that big is supposed to move that fast. Steel plates snap apart. Rivets shoot through the air like bullets. One punches through a window behind you and doesn't stop. Someone screams. You're not sure if it's you. Then comes the wave. You've never seen anything like it. No one has. 2 million gallons of hot, half-fermented molasses explode from the shattered tank, forming a wave 25 feet high and moving at 35 miles an hour. That's faster than a horse, faster than you, faster than anything thick and sweet has any right to be. It looks like a tsunami made of tar, dark, churning, bubbling with gas and rage. The molasses isn't pouring out. It's charging. You run. Of course you run, but it doesn't matter. The wave is already on you. It hits with the force of a freight train dipped in caramel. The sound is unreal, a wet, sucking roar that drowns out the screams. The street vanishes. Horses disappear. Entire buildings crack from their foundations and lurch sideways, dragged by the weight of the syrup. A delivery cart is lifted off the ground, floats for a moment like a terrible dessert, and vanishes beneath the brown. The heat is the first surprise. You always thought molasses was room temperature. Harmless, sluggish, maybe annoying. But this batch had been fermenting, expanding, heating from the inside. When it hits you, it's not just sticky, it's warm, almost scalding. It soaks through your clothes in seconds and clings to your skin like glue. You try to stand, but your boots are already trapped. You try to shout, but your mouth fills with the taste of sugar, rust, and something sour that makes your stomach turn. All around you, people are flailing, sinking, screaming for help. Some never get the chance. A child is swept off the steps of a nearby building and vanishes into the syrup. A horse pinned beneath a wagon kicks once, twice, and stops moving. 2 men try to pull a co-worker free, only to be pulled in with him. It's not water. You can't swim in it. You can barely move. Every gesture takes 3 times the effort. Every breath is a gamble. Some people are thrown against buildings. Others are crushed under debris. One poor soul is slammed into a lamppost so hard, his body leaves an imprint. A truck is shoved into the harbour. A firehouse, a full 2-story firehouse, is pushed off its foundation and shunted into the street like a child's toy. The flood doesn't discriminate. It doesn't hesitate. It just takes. Minutes pass, but they feel like hours. The wave slows eventually, but not before the damage is done. The tank, now a twisted mess of metal and shame, sits half collapsed at the centre of it all, like a bomb that forgot to finish going off. The molasses settles, a thick, oozing blanket over the neighbourhood. Everything is brown. Everything is quiet. You're lucky, if you can call it that. You're alive. You're covered in syrup, bruised and coughing, but not crushed, not drowned. You try to stand, but the molasses has begun to cool and thicken. It's already like walking through cement. Your legs feel heavy. Your arms ache. Every step is a victory. You're alive, but you're in hell's version of a bakery. You look around and see neighbours stumbling from doorways. Some are missing shoes, some are missing teeth. Everyone is soaked, no one is talking. What's there to say? You just lived through a molasses flood. You're not even sure you'll ever say those words out loud. Who would believe them? It takes almost an hour before help starts to arrive. Police, firefighters, neighbours from the next block over who heard the explosion and came running. They bring ropes, boards, anything they can use to reach people still trapped. One man is found stuck to a wall, literally glued to it, barely breathing. Another is pulled from a basement, gasping and coated in molasses, from scalp to boot. The rescuers aren't immune either. They sink, slip, collapse under the weight of it all. Every life saved is a battle. And the smell, my God, the smell. It's sweet and sharp with an undercurrent of something decaying. It clings to your nose. It burrows into your clothes. It's molasses, yes, but it's also blood, oil, wood, and the faint metallic tang of disaster. No one will ever smell syrup the same way again. Later they'll say, the tank hissed like a dragon before it blew. They'll say, the wave was 30 feet high, or 40, or 50. They'll call it an act of God, a freak accident, a 1 in a million event. But you were there, you know better. It wasn't a surprise, it was inevitable. It was the slowest disaster anyone could have predicted, and no one did anything to stop. There's a moment, just before the molasses hits you full in the chest, where time slows down. You can see it, not a wave, not really, but a wall. Brown, bubbling, thick as wet cement, and somehow moving faster than anything that should weigh 10,000 tons. It defies logic. You always imagined molasses as slow, sluggish, a metaphor for things that never quite get going. But this isn't metaphor. This is speed. This is force. This is what happens when 2 million gallons of fermented sugar lose containment all at once. When it slams into you, it doesn't feel like a liquid. It feels like a train made of pudding. Your body lifts off the ground. You don't know how far you're thrown, only that you land on your side in something that immediately begins to pull at you. It's hot, not boiling, but hot enough to sting, to startle, to make every inch of your skin scream in protest. You try to wipe your face, but your hands stick. You try to breathe, but the air is thick with sugar and rust and something else. Something sour that curls your stomach and makes your throat close. You're not just coated in molasses. You're inside it, and it doesn't want to let go. The force of the wave doesn't just knock people over, it breaks them. Bones snap. Chests collapse. More than one person is killed not by drowning, but by being thrown against a wall or crushed beneath flying debris. A steel girder from the tank lands like a javelin, spearing a delivery cart and the man behind it. A horse is flung sideways into a brick wall and splits open on impact, its body reduced to pulp beneath the syrup. You see a woman dragged under the wave and vanish in seconds. There's no chance to scream, no time to fight. The molasses doesn't care. It just keeps going. The buildings don't stand a chance either. Whole structures are lifted off their foundations and carried several feet before collapsing in on themselves. One brick warehouse folds inward like wet cardboard, its contents, crates, barrels, human beings, all pulled into the sludge. The steel support columns of the elevated train line twist, bend, then hold, barely, as the flood slams against them. If the train had been there just a few minutes earlier, it would have gone down too. A police station is half submerged. The firehouse is gone. You try to stand, but your feet are already encased. You push against the ground, only to feel your arms sink deeper. The molasses thickens almost immediately, cooling and congealing in the January air. What was once a rushing wave is now more like quicksand. The suction is unreal. It pulls at you with every movement, robbing you of leverage, of breath, of hope. Your coat becomes an anchor. Your boots feel like cement blocks. You try to wriggle free, but the more you struggle, the tighter it grips you. Some people do manage to pull themselves out. They crawl onto bits of floating debris, wooden planks, barrels, pieces of shattered porches, anything that holds them above the goo. Others are helped by neighbours, by passers-by who risk sinking themselves just to drag one more body out of the syrup. It's chaos, but it's also strangely quiet. The flood has swallowed sound along with everything else. Screams are muffled, shouts disappear into the molasses. Even the horses, the few that survive, are whinnying in low, terrified bursts that barely register. There's no dignity here. Survivors are coated from head to toe in thick, brown sludge. It's in their mouths, their ears, their nostrils. It clings to their eyelashes, glues their hair to their faces, seeps into every fold of clothing. A man pulls himself out of a second-story window, drops into what he thinks is shallow syrup, and sinks to his chest. Another is rescued only when someone spots his hand, the only part of him still above the surface, twitching like the last leaf on a dying branch. Children are pulled from piles of debris with their arms stuck to their sides, like dolls dipped in glue. Nobody looks human anymore. Everyone looks like a failed candy experiment. And then there are the ones who don't move, the ones you pass as you try to climb your way out. A man face down in a puddle, unmoving. A woman half trapped beneath a wooden beam, her expression frozen mid-scream. A horse's head sticking out of the molasses, eyes wide, foam at the mouth. The smell is starting to change. Still sweet, yes, but layered now with the stink of panic, of bodily fluids, of death. It's the smell of a candy shop after a massacre. You finally find higher ground, a stone stoop that the flood barely reached. You collapse on it, gasping, coughing, trying to spit the syrup from your throat. It clings, refuses to leave. You wipe your face with a sleeve that's just as filthy as your skin. Your eyes sting. You look down and see your hands shaking. You try to stop them. You fail. Behind you, the neighbourhood is gone. Not in the fire and rubble sense, but in the spirit of the place sense. The streets are still there, sort of. The buildings are damaged, but not entirely levelled. But it's not the North End anymore. It's something else now. Something quieter, stickier, more broken. It looks like a battlefield dipped in caramel. And for many, that's exactly what it is. The molasses starts to cool. That's the final cruelty. As the air temperature drops, the syrup hardens, locking debris and bodies in place. The people who survived the initial wave now face another threat: entrapment. Those who haven't already escaped find themselves encased, stiffening slowly, like bugs in amber. Rescue teams start arriving, firemen, police, volunteers, and they have to use chisels, axes, and brute force to pull people free. Every move is labour. Every life saved is paid for in sweat and splinters. By the time the sun starts to set, the street is a brown graveyard. Some of the bodies won't be found for days. Some will be too damaged to identify. The final death toll will sit at 21, though many more are injured. Broken bones, concussions, lungs burned from the fumes. The company will try to downplay the damage, of course. They'll call it an accident, a tragedy, an act of God. But you were there. You know better. You don't remember being rescued. One moment, you're half submerged in a cooling pool of molasses. Your limbs too heavy to lift, your lungs seizing up with every breath. The next, you're being hauled backward by the armpits, dragged across syrupy gravel by a man cursing so creatively, you wonder if he's inventing new languages on the spot. You try to help, but your legs don't respond. They're either broken or simply too sugar-logged to function. Honestly, you're not sure which option is worse. The first clear sensation you get is cold, not the crisp, cheek-pinching kind of cold that comes with a January breeze. No, this is the deep, soul-sucking kind. The kind that seeps through wet clothes and sticky skin, settles into your bones, and whispers, "You're not getting warm again. Ever." You're wet, coated in syrup from scalp to soles, and even though the molasses was warm when it hit you, it's not anymore. It's thickening around your joints, gluing your shirt to your ribs, hardening like tar. You're starting to realise that survival is less about escaping the flood and more about not freezing into a human toffee sculpture afterward. Your rescuer, some local dock worker who clearly drew the short straw, lays you down on a dryish patch of stone and shouts for more help. 2 other men arrive, slipping and sliding across the muck like drunks on a skating rink. One has a coil of rope, the other a plank of wood they're using as a makeshift stretcher. Neither looks confident. They all reek of sugar, sweat and anxiety. Nobody trained for this. There's no manual on how to extract people from a molasses disaster. It's all guesswork and grim determination. They try to lift you, but it's like hoisting a sack of wet cement wrapped in flypaper. Every inch of you resists. Your clothes are soaked and heavy. Your boots are still half stuck to the ground. Your skin makes a horrible peeling noise as it separates from the stone. You try not to scream, but something halfway between a moan and a gargle slips out anyway. The men wince. One mutters an apology. Then they hoist you onto the board, grunting with the effort, and start carrying you toward what might loosely be described as safety. Along the way, you get a better look at the chaos around you. It's worse than you thought. People stagger through the sludge with blank stares, molasses dripping from their hair like they've been dunked in nightmares. Horses are still twitching in place, some being euthanized on the spot because it's kinder than trying to dig them out. A child sobs into his father's coat. An older woman clutches a broken cane and stares at the tank like it personally betrayed her. And everywhere, absolutely everywhere, is the smell. Thick, sugary, cloying. It would almost be pleasant if it weren't so clearly masking rot, blood and despair. When you're dropped, gently but not gracefully, onto a makeshift triage station, someone immediately tries to offer you tea. You blink at them. Tea? Now? You're not sure if you're hallucinating or if this is just how New England copes with crisis. Either way, your fingers are too stiff to hold a cup. A nurse? You think she's a nurse? Though she might also be a schoolteacher pressed into service, starts checking you over. She asks you your name, and you answer something that sounds like a name, but might be the word plaster. She nods as if that's good enough. They try to clean you, but it's hopeless. The molasses won't come off. It clings to everything. Your hair, your eyelashes, the inside of your ears. There's molasses between your fingers, under your nails, in places you're deeply uncomfortable thinking about. Your underwear feels like it's been made from licorice. Every time you shift, there's a sickening squelch. The nurse takes a wet rag, dabs at your face and mutters, "Oh, honey," like you're already a lost cause. You want to tell her that molasses is not honey, and you're very much not okay, but all that comes out is a cough laced with sugar and bile. Around you, others are faring no better. One man keeps muttering about being stuck in a dream. Another keeps asking where his hat went, over and over, even as someone gently places it back on his head. A woman is lying nearby, her eyes wide open but unblinking, her hands curled into fists, as if she's still holding on to something that isn't there. Someone else is being carried in on a door. Not a stretcher, a literal door, because they ran out of supplies. A priest walks from group to group offering blessings, and in one case, whiskey. The whiskey seems to help. As the day drags on, your body starts to tremble from exhaustion. Not just the physical kind, though your muscles ache in ways you didn't know possible, but the mental kind, too. The kind of fatigue that only comes from being briefly entombed in industrial desert, and then dragged out with half your dignity gone. You're alive, technically, but every time you close your eyes, you see it again. The wave, the chaos, the sudden, unstoppable weight of it all. You're not sure sleep is even possible, not tonight. Later, someone offers you a blanket. It's sticky too. You take it anyway. Someone else hands you a biscuit. It tastes like brown sugar and sawdust. You eat it anyway. You're not even sure what your name is anymore. All you know is that it ends in syrup. You're cold, you're shaking, you're alive. And you're starting to realise the worst part isn't over. It's just begun. Because now comes the clean-up. The questions, the lawsuits, the funerals. And through it all the molasses remains. In the streets, in your lungs, in your nightmares. You survived the flood, but the flood isn't done with you. You might assume that when a 50-foot tank explodes and drowns part of a city in hot molasses, the people responsible would face consequences. You'd think a company storing 2 million gallons of unstable syrup in a neighbourhood would be forced to explain itself, possibly while being yelled at by a judge. You might even dare to hope that someone in a tailored suit would lose their job, or at least have to pay for the funerals. But no, this is America, and in America the question is never who's responsible. It's how can we spin this? The United States Industrial Alcohol Company, the charming folks who own the tank, respond with the moral courage of a weasel caught stealing jam. Their first statement is something along the lines of, "It must have been anarchists." That's not a joke. That's their actual explanation. Not faulty steel, not bad welds, not the fact that they built a municipal death trap with all the oversight of a lemonade stand. No, it had to be sabotage. Political radicals, probably immigrants, maybe socialists, possibly ghosts, anything but them. You, like everyone else in the neighbourhood, have questions. Namely, how do anarchists cause a molasses tank to explode from the inside without anyone seeing them? Did they sneak in with tiny drills? Did they whisper seditious slogans at the bolts until they lost their will to live? But the press eats it up. Anarchists are convenient villains. They don't sue for libel, they don't own newspapers, and they definitely don't get invited to testify before Congress. So the headlines run wild. Molasses tank sabotaged. Enemies of industry suspected. One paper even suggests the whole thing might have been a terrorist act meant to derail America's sugar-based economy, which, if true, would make it the least efficient act of terror in recorded history. Meanwhile, the people who actually lived through it are trying to pick up the pieces. You attend funerals where the caskets are sealed because the bodies were too badly crushed or soaked to show. You help friends shovel molasses out of their basements, even though you know it'll never fully come out. You visit a co-worker in the hospital who hasn't stopped coughing since the flood. And while you're doing all that, the company's lawyers are preparing their defense, a masterpiece of slippery logic and pearl-clutching indignation. Their argument goes something like this. Yes, the tank exploded. Yes, people died. But no, it's not their fault. Because you see, no one could have predicted that a 2.3 million gallon container made of cheap steel and zero oversight would fail. Who could have known? Besides the workers, and the engineers, and the neighbours, and the horses, and well, you. But that's not the point. The point is they didn't mean for it to happen, and therefore you can't be mad. They say the tank passed inspection, though they won't say what kind of inspection, or who performed it, or whether inspection means anything more than we looked at it once and it didn't fall over. They point out that it stood for years without incident, as if that somehow proves it was safe. That's like arguing that a roulette wheel is perfectly reliable because it hasn't landed on explosion yet. They even claim that the molasses inside may have fermented in an unusual way, implying that maybe the sugar itself is to blame. Not them. Just sugar behaving badly. Happens all the time. You watch the case unfold with the growing awareness that justice is not so much blind as it is extremely nearsighted and easily distracted by pocket watches. The hearings stretch on for years, literally. More than 100 people testify. Engineers, survivors, company men, clean-up workers. Everyone has a story, and most of them involve screaming, syrup, and trauma. A metallurgist eventually concludes that the steel used in the tank was brittle, and that the design was fundamentally flawed. But it takes nearly 5 years for that conclusion to stick. In the meantime, the company pulls every trick in the book. They question witness credibility. They claim the survivors are exaggerating. One executive even argues that the disaster was a visitation of God, as if the Almighty woke up one morning and decided to punish Boston with dessert. You begin to understand that the legal system isn't built to handle this kind of thing. Not because it's complex, but because the people responsible have money. And in this world, money means patience, lawyers, loopholes, enough ink and paper to bury the truth in bureaucracy. Eventually, a ruling comes down. The company is liable, sort of. They're ordered to pay damages to the victims' families, a few $100,000 total, divided among dozens of people. Enough to buy a few homes, maybe. Not enough to undrown a neighbourhood. Certainly not enough to erase what happened. You get a cheque eventually. You stare at it for a long time. It smells faintly of ink and sugar. No one goes to jail. No one loses their position. No one stands in front of a crowd and says, "We built a bomb and hoped it wouldn't go off." The men who ran the company move on to other ventures. The tank is never rebuilt. The lot where it stood is cleared, levelled, and eventually paved over. People forget. The news moves on. You don't. You think sometimes about how different it all could have been if they'd reinforced the walls, if they'd listened to the warnings, if they'd cared even slightly more about safety than speed. But they didn't. And now you live in the aftermath of their indifference. Every time it rains, the streets release a faint, sugary smell. Every time the temperature rises, the ground sweats syrup. It's in the cracks, in the bricks, in the soil itself. The flood was one day. The consequences last a lifetime. The first thing you learn during the cleanup is that molasses doesn't come off. Not easily, not quickly, not ever really. In the days immediately following the flood, every able-bodied person in the North End is conscripted into the war against syrup. You don't volunteer. You're drafted by the simple fact that your home, your shoes, and probably your soul are all coated in the stuff. You wake up sticky. You go to sleep sticky. You start to believe you're becoming part molasses yourself, as if the flood left something inside you that soap can't reach. City officials, engineers, and a growing number of very sweaty, very tired cleanup crews descend on the neighbourhood with shovels, brooms, buckets, and a kind of exhausted optimism that lasts about 3 hours. The first few attempts to clean the streets involve scraping, sweeping, and good old-fashioned elbow grease. These fail immediately. Molasses laughs at brooms. It clogs shovels. It clings to boots and refuses to be pushed. It hardens when cold, softens when warm, and oozes back into the cracks you just cleared, like it's trying to reassert dominance. Next, they bring in hoses, high-pressure water, gallons and gallons of it, aimed at the streets like they're trying to blast the sins off Boston. But the molasses mixes with the water, forming a thin film that spreads faster than anyone anticipated. Now, instead of containing the mess, they've created rivers of diluted syrup that snake into every available path downhill. Sidewalks, gutters, sewer grates, basements, subway stairwells. It flows with enthusiasm. By the end of the day, downtown Boston smells like a gingerbread house on fire. The city turns to salt water, hauled in from the harbour by hoses stretched for blocks. It helps, a little. Salt breaks down sugar better than fresh water does, but it also corrodes pipes, warps metal, and kills what little landscaping you had. You watch as a perfectly innocent tree turns brown at the roots and keels over like it smelled something offensive. Your front step is now a hardened slab of glaze. You've scrubbed it 4 times. It still glistens. Inside people's homes it's worse. The molasses got everywhere. Into walls, under floorboards, inside pantries, around bed frames. Entire basements are declared unsalvageable and simply sealed off. Furniture is ruined. Mattresses are dumped in the streets. You hear of one man who tried to boil his bedding to save it. Now he sleeps on a bare cot and weeps softly into a sugar-crusted pillow. The molasses gets into ovens, coat linings, and the spines of books. Some people try to burn it out. This goes about as well as you'd expect. One man manages to set part of his shed on fire. The shed burns. The syrup remains. Clothing becomes a tragedy all its own. You've never appreciated dry laundry until you've pulled a sock from a molasses puddle that's had 3 days to ferment. You try to wash your clothes in scalding water and soap. They come out darker, heavier, and somehow more adhesive than before. Eventually, you give up. You wear what you can salvage and try to ignore the subtle crunch it makes when you move. You know it's in your pores, in your hair, in the corner of your eye where you keep wiping, hoping to feel clean again. The horses are mostly gone now. The ones that didn't drown were put down after injuries became obvious. The clean-up crews dispose of them quickly and quietly. The street smells of syrup and death, a combination that turns your stomach every time the wind shifts. The flies love it. They descend in clouds, buzzing, biting, relentless. Every surface is a banquet. They bite your arms as you scrub the porch. They land on your food before it reaches your mouth. You start to understand why some people leave town. Temporarily, they say, for air. But you suspect some of them just never come back. The newspapers romanticize it, of course. Boston's sweet disaster, the sticky tragedy. Some tourists show up to see the damage. They giggle. They bring their children. You want to scream at them. You want to show them the boots left behind by the man who never got out. You want them to smell what you smell when you close your eyes. Molasses and rot and grief blended into something permanent. Weeks turn into months. The cleanup doesn't end so much as slow into a dull ritual. People scrub the same walls again and again, hoping this time the sugar will give up. The city installs new drainage systems, replaces sidewalks, and quietly stops asking for progress updates. There's only so much you can do with a natural disaster no one prepared for. Some neighbourhoods seem normal again, from a distance, but if you get close, you can still see it. The shimmer of syrup on bricks, the warped wood of doors that were never meant to get that wet, the ghost stain where a building used to be. You eventually stop trying to clean your own house. What's left is livable, more or less. You air it out every day. You light candles to mask the scent. It never really works. You get used to sleeping with the faint aroma of burnt sugar hovering in the corners of the room. You wake up with your hands still tacky, even when they feel dry. You stop asking why. Years pass and the molasses remains. In the stories people tell, kids dare each other to touch the pavement where the tank used to stand. Old-timers argue about the exact height of the wave, as if it matters. You overhear someone at a cafe say they can still smell it on hot days. You don't laugh, because they're right. On the first warm afternoon of spring, you step outside, take a breath, and there it is. That unmistakable sweetness clinging to the air like it never left. And you realise it didn't. You're dead now. Sorry, that part probably snuck up on you. You survived the wave, the clean-up, the hearings, and years of smelling like dessert, but eventually your body gave in. Not because of the molasses directly, but because life in the shadow of it takes its toll. Maybe it was pneumonia from too many wet winters. Maybe it was something slower, like bitterness, or maybe the syrup just clung to something deep inside you and refused to let go, thickening your blood a little more each year. Either way, you're gone. But your story isn't. It turns out that a city being drowned in molasses is memorable. People don't forget that. They might forget the names of the victims or the exact year it happened, but the image, that sticks. A wall of syrup flattening a neighbourhood. Horses sucked into the street. The smell of sugar and ruin lingering in the gutters. These things lodge in the imagination, and once they're in, they ferment. The facts get blurry, the details get sticky, but the story grows. At first, the gossip is simple. People talk about the wave, how tall it was, how fast it moved, how one guy swore he saw it coming and still couldn't outrun it. Someone says it was 40 feet high. Another insists it was 50. One man claims he rode it like a log down a river, which you know isn't true, because he was unconscious at the time and had to be dug out of a bakery wall. But the story spreads anyway. The disaster becomes a kind of myth, half fact, half folklore, sweetened with time and retold with increasing flair. Children dare each other to run across the site. Parents warn them not to, saying it's cursed ground. A few claim to hear groaning when the wind blows in from the harbour, as if the tank never stopped leaking. One woman swears she saw a ghost in her cellar, a man coated in brown, weeping silently by the furnace. Another says her pantry door sticks shut every summer because the wood remembers. These stories aren't questioned. People nod, murmur, and cross themselves. Because when something this strange happens, it doesn't leave clean edges. Ghost tours crop up within a few years, though they're more rumour than rigour. Tour guides lead visitors past the old tank site, long since cleared, and gesture at empty spaces where something awful once happened. They tell tales of molasses seeping from cracks in the sidewalk. They point to streetlights that flicker at odd times. They lean in and whisper that sometimes, if you listen closely, you can hear footsteps slogging through syrup long after everyone's gone to bed. Even the newspapers help keep it alive. They run anniversary pieces every few years. Boston's sweetest tragedy, the Molasses Massacre. You'd think they'd tire of it, but no. Editors love the contrast, the whimsy of sugar and the horror of death. It's the perfect headline bait. They reprint the same grainy photo of the wrecked tank, the same quotes from survivors, the same wide-eyed accounts of syrup-soaked shoes. And every few years they find someone new who says, "You know, I think I can still smell it on hot days." And maybe they can. You become a footnote in some of these articles, a name on a list, a casualty of caramel. You don't mind. It's a strange kind of immortality, but it's better than nothing. Most people don't get statues or songs. You get ghost stories and sticky sidewalks. You'll take it. Of course, the legend isn't always respectful. Kids laugh about it in school. Some local comedian tries to turn it into a joke about slow deaths. One guy at a bar insists that the whole thing was a hoax, like the moon landing, staged to make Boston look interesting. Another claims it was an insurance scam, and the molasses was actually just very thin oil. You'd roll your eyes if you could, but you're not here to correct them. The truth doesn't travel as fast as syrup, or as far. And then there's the weird stuff. A candy company tries to capitalise on the story and makes disaster fudge, shaped like little molasses waves. It sells surprisingly well. A local brewery releases a stout called Tank Burst. It tastes like regret and raisins. Someone writes a play, The Syrup of Our Discontent, and it plays to sold-out houses for 3 weekends. Tourists buy t-shirts with terrible puns. "I survived the Molassaker," one says, in bold brown lettering. You didn't, but hey, someone's making money. The city eventually adds a small plaque near the site. It's tasteful, brief. It mentions the date, the number of dead, the tank, the flood. No graphic details, no mention of how long the smell lingered. No explanation for why it happened, just a quiet little sign that people walk past on their way to coffee shops and Red Sox games. Still, some stop. They read it, they squint at the pavement, and for just a second, they picture it. The wave, the wreckage, the sticky silence after it all stopped moving. That's how you live on, in flashes, in overheard comments and old newspaper clippings, in stories told at dusk by people who weren't there but want to feel like they were. Maybe that's the best you can hope for. You weren't famous. You didn't change the world. But you became part of something people remember. Something so bizarre, so horrible, and so uniquely American that it refuses to be forgotten. And maybe, just maybe, on the hottest days of summer, when the wind blows through the alleyways and the pavement starts to sweat, someone will wrinkle their nose and say, "Do you smell that? Like burnt sugar and something rotten?" And they'll laugh nervously and say, "Must be nothing." But you'll know, and they'll know, and the street will remember. After any great disaster, there's a brief shining moment when everyone pretends they've learned something. People stand in front of microphones, clear their throats, and say things like, "Lessons must be learned, and never again." Reports are written, committees are formed, there are hearings and inspections, and occasionally very serious-looking diagrams. For a few months after the Great Molasses Flood, it looks like Boston, and maybe even the nation, is finally going to take infrastructure safety seriously. You don't hold your breath, mostly because if you did, you'd pass out from the lingering sugar fumes, but also because you know better. You've seen how the system works. You've watched men in polished shoes shake hands over broken promises. You've heard company lawyers explain how none of this could have been predicted, despite the fact that everyone did predict it, loudly and often. Still, change is coming, slowly, like molasses in January, which you now know is much faster than advertised. The first real consequence is legal. The courts, after years of deliberation, find United States Industrial Alcohol liable for the disaster. They're forced to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages, which in 1919 money is a significant chunk of change. It's the largest civil settlement in Massachusetts history at the time. People say this marks a turning point, that companies can no longer cut corners without paying the price. But if you look closely, it's not the people who designed the tank who pay. It's the shareholders. The company survives. The executives move on. The accountants adjust the books. And the tank, it's gone, melted down for scrap like it never existed. Still, the ruling does lead to one positive development. Boston starts requiring structural engineers to sign off on large projects, which is, when you think about it, an incredibly low bar. It's like installing smoke detectors after the house burns down. But it's something. From now on, if someone wants to build a 50-foot tank in a residential neighbourhood, they'll at least need a licensed professional to say, yes, this probably won't explode. Whether that professional is being paid to say, it is another matter. The Molasses Flood becomes a case study in what happens when corporate greed collides with zero oversight. For decades afterward, engineering textbooks cite it as a cautionary tale. Professors draw diagrams of stress points. Lawyers nod gravely about due diligence. It becomes an example, a warning, a punchline, but only within certain circles. For the public at large, it fades. It becomes folklore, a sticky footnote. And outside of Boston, the lessons evaporate. Across the country, tanks are still built without proper tests. Factories still run without fire exits. Buildings still collapse because someone said, that's probably good enough. The United States enters the roaring 20s with all the arrogance of a nation that believes it has nothing left to learn. Prohibition arrives. The alcohol stops flowing, publicly at least. The industrial alcohol game shifts. The next disasters come from different places. Fires, floods, crashes, collapses. But the pattern stays the same. People die, reports are written, nothing really changes. You start to realise that in America, tragedy is often just a speed bump on the way to the next quarterly report. The system absorbs the impact, pays a settlement, and moves on. A few new rules might be passed, but they're usually reactive, like building a fence around a well after someone's already fallen in. No one steps back and asks why the well was open in the first place. No one redesigns the neighbourhood. They just post a warning sign. And when they do regulate something, it's almost always because people made enough noise. The Molasses flood didn't change safety standards because someone in government had a revelation. It changed because survivors refused to be quiet. Because people testified, and journalists dug, and engineers got loud. It changed because Molasses killed 21 people and threatened to kill more. Not because the system cared, but because the system was forced to notice. You think about that sometimes, late at night, when the neighbourhood is quiet and the air still carries the faintest scent of syrup. You think about how close it came to being swept under the rug entirely. If the tank had been a little smaller, if fewer people had died, if the flood had happened in a less visible neighbourhood, would anyone have remembered? Would they have bothered to hold someone accountable? Or would they have just blamed the weather and moved on? Even now, the regulations that came out of the disaster are narrow in scope. Engineers must review designs, city inspectors get more authority. That's about it. There's no sweeping federal law, no massive reform movement, just a few extra signatures on a few more forms. It helps, sure, but only so much. The next catastrophe, wherever it happens, will still involve people ignoring warnings, cutting costs, and hoping nobody sues. What you learn, standing in the aftermath of something so surreal and so preventable, is that memory fades faster than molasses dries. People forget. Institutions forget. Even cities forget. And cities, more than anything, like to pretend their pasts are tidy. But the ground remembers. The bricks remember. The ones who lived through it carry it for the rest of their lives. Even if the courts only carry it for 5 years and a dollar figure. You wanted justice. You got a settlement. You wanted reform. You got paperwork. You wanted someone to say, "This matters. We'll never let this happen again." What you got was a shrug and the slow grind of bureaucracy, whispering, "Business as usual." It's hard to believe standing there today that the ground beneath your feet once ran thick with death and sugar. The Molasses flood has faded into the background of Boston's history. Not erased exactly, but polished, sanitized. Tourists stroll along the harbour walk near Commercial Street, sipping iced coffees, laughing, pausing to read informational signs that mention the Great Molasses Flood of 1919, with the same tone they use for shipbuilding and Paul Revere. There's a plaque now, small and clean and understated, near the site where the tank once stood. It doesn't smell, it doesn't stain, it doesn't stick to your shoes or your memories unless you let it. The neighbourhood has changed. The tenements are gone, replaced by condos. The factories have turned into offices and boutiques. The rumbling of horses and dock carts has given way to the dull hum of traffic, and the occasional street musician trying to make Sweet Caroline sound fresh. No trace of the tank remains. Not the steel, not the concrete pad it sat on, not even the fencing that once kept kids from licking its leaks. If you didn't know better, you'd never guess that 21 people died here, suffocated and crushed beneath a wave of fermented syrup. And yet, if you squint, if you close your eyes and listen on a hot day, something remains. Some claim you can still smell it when the temperature rises above 90. It might be psychological, or it might be real. Sugar clings to everything after all. It seeps into porous brick and lingers in the deepest cracks of concrete. The flood-soaked basements seeped into foundations, coated everything it touched with a glaze that no mop could remove. Some of that molasses never left. It's part of the bones of the city now, just another sedimentary layer in Boston's long, complicated past. The site itself is now a playground and a park, Langona Park, complete with benches, tennis courts, and a baseball diamond. Children laugh where people once drowned. Dogs run freely across the same soil that once sucked men down by the boots. There's no harm in that. The world moves on. But there's something strange about seeing joggers breeze past the invisible graveyard, earbuds in, smiling, sweating. You wonder how many of them know what they're running on. The legend persists, if only as a curiosity. Local ghost tours still mention it, usually after the more dramatic tales of witches and revolutions. They throw in the Molasses flood for a laugh, a historical palate cleanser, something absurd to end the tour on a sweet note. The guide might mention the wave's height, throw in a ghost story or two, maybe point out a brick wall that smelled like syrup until the 1950s. People chuckle, they snap photos, they move on to dinner. But molasses didn't go away. It's still stored in massive quantities all over the world. It's still used in baking, fermentation, and ethanol production. Large tanks, far larger than the one that exploded in Boston, exist in ports and processing plants in dozens of countries. Some are built well, some are inspected regularly, some aren't. You know how it goes. Materials get cheaper, maintenance gets delayed, budgets get cut, and all it takes is one flaw, one rivet too loose, one weld too thin, one company too confident it won't be them. In the years after the flood, new storage standards were introduced, slowly, unevenly, reluctantly. But human memory is short, and the sweet disasters fade faster than the violent ones. We remember fires and gunshots. We forget sugar. The very absurdity of the molasses flood makes it hard for people to take seriously. Death by syrup sounds like something from a cartoon. It doesn't feel like real history, not until you read the death toll, not until you look at photos of twisted steel and crushed homes, not until you hear about the man they pulled from the rubble with syrup still bubbling from his mouth. You'd like to believe it couldn't happen again, that we're smarter now, that we've learned. But you've seen the world, you've read the news. There's always another tank, another shortcut, another company that decides safety is expensive and risk is manageable. It might not be molasses next time. It might be oil or chemicals or natural gas, something colourless, odourless, flavourless, something that doesn't leave behind a sugary scent to warn the neighbours. That's the quiet legacy of the flood, not just the laws it inspired or the plaque on the wall, but the reminder that every city is a layer cake of risk and memory. Most of the time, you don't think about it. You walk the streets, buy your coffee, nod politely at the historical markers, and assume the past is where it belongs, beneath you, buried, done. But sometimes, on hot days, in quiet moments, you remember that the line between normal and disaster is thinner than you'd like. Sometimes, it's only a few brittle rivets away. And Boston remembers in its own way, not loudly, not with museums or monuments, but with rumours, with street names, with the occasional rust-coloured stain on an old foundation, the kind that doesn't come out no matter how many times it's scrubbed. People whisper about the smell, about the ghosts, about the stories that stuck, even when everything else washed away. You are gone, but your story lingers, in the bricks, in the soil, in the air, in the warning signs no one reads, until it's too late. You are a casualty of molasses, but more than that, you are a warning. And if someone ever listens, really listens, maybe they'll stop and think before building the next tank, the next shortcut, the next time bomb dressed up like storage. But probably not.